Hey there, welcome to another Rhino Dillo Designs video. I'm Robert, and I am throwing what ends up being a jug in this video. I didn't think it was going to be at first, but here I'm working with probably 3-ish, maybe a little bit more pounds of clay, and threw it down just straight from the block, which ended up being a mistake on my part, but I'll figure that out here in a little bit. But right here, I'm just coning this up and down. We cone clay up and down on the wheel to make sure that, we get all the particles aligned and make sure that everything's kind of homogeneous and workable. Makes it easier to work the clay on the wheel. It doesn't fight against you as much. It makes it easier to center. And speaking of centering, here I am making my final centering attempt here. You can see a little bit of a wobble there, and that's okay, but I get it as close as I can and before I start to go in and pull out. But here I'm just making my initial entry and pulling out the wall of the vessel, the wall of the clay body here, establishing my base, compressing it, and then right here I am just recentering that body of clay. You can see the wobble had disappeared, and I pull up the initial pull just to get a conical shape going and get the initial height established. And here I'm realizing at this point, you can see a wobble in that clay body, and I'm realizing there's something off with this clay. I don't know what it is at this point, but what it later turns out to be is a bubble. And you'll see how I deal with that here in a little bit. So I'm just cleaning up the wheel a little bit and then making my initial pull for bringing the scrap clay that's there in the outside of the clay body and shaping this cone, bringing it up. Okay, and after this, I'm going to press in and try to bring a big chunk of clay up from its base and get the initial height of the vessel that I'm trying to pull. And unfortunately, it doesn't work out the way that I anticipated. This clay is fighting me a little bit. I still don't realize why, and so I go toward a more of a collaring approach here. And so collaring is essentially wrapping my hands around the clay body as it turns and forcing it inward and upward. And what that allows me to do is to compress the walls of the clay up to gain some height, and as well as an opportunity to recenter and establish a little bit of stability back into the clay body and the walls. Sometimes it'll allow you to establish a little bit more thickness in the walls as well, depending on how big you've already gotten in your wall structure. But here I am making my, I think it's 4th, 5th pull here. On the next one, when I start to go in and shape this, is when I realize that there is a bubble in the clay wall, and it's creating some issues. So when you have a bubble in the clay wall, what happens is it distorts the area of that clay wall, and it can do a few different things. One, if you're lucky, it'll just pop. If it's small enough, if it's weak enough, it'll just pop as you pull the clay upwards and over. You run your hands over that bubble and compress it, and it'll pop. If you're unlucky and you have a sizable bubble or something that's a little bit deeper into the wall, what will happen is it will distort the clay wall. And that distortion of the clay wall creates an unevenness in the clay circle there. So in the ring that is turning around in that plane. And so what it creates is unevenness in the thickness of the wall at that area and above it, because you're pulling up clay at a different rate because the bubble is distorting the pressure in that area. And it leads to things like this. So right now I'm dealing with and realizing, okay, that bubble formed an undulation in the rim, as well as a varied thickness in the rim wall. and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with that right now. And what ends up happening, I just cut it off. I cut off the initial, the very top edge of the wall, and realize that there's a very thickness there. And I go in and try to compress it and recenter the wall at the top of the pot. That's really difficult to do, sometimes impossible, but you're going to see me try to do it here in a second. So here I'm reaching for the pin tool, and I'm going to go ahead and stick that in, create that initial cut, and peel that off the top of the pot. And you can't really tell from the video, but there is quite a distortion in the thickness of this wall, and so I am compressing this from different angles with my fingers, trying to uniformly form that thickness of the wall, and reestablish that. Ultimately, I'm not really all that successful. I'm even, switching up dominant hand and sponge hand and all of that here. But I get some stability back, which is good enough to start pulling up again and shaping the pot again. And so I continue to do that. I'm going to introduce some ribs here in a second to actually smooth out and provide a little bit more stability in shaping the pot itself. And so this is a very flexible rib that I'm using here, and this is more just to create some uniformity and shapeliness to the pot. And I think I just made a poor choice here in choosing a very, very flexible rib. And at this point, I am panicking, to be honest. It's wobbling way too much. There's way too much instability here. And I know at this point, I'm not going to be able to get this pot to do what I want it to do, or initially intended for it to do. And so I'm just trying to save the form a bit here, get it up off of that belly that started to sag there, and figure out, okay, what am I going to do here? And at this point, I'm about to cut it off the wheel. My instructor reminded me that the previous session I had talked about wanting to do a modified jug. And so that's what I'm about to do. Unfortunately, I didn't film it, but you'll be able to see the end result. So here I'm just going to cut the wheel off, or the form off the wheel, sliding a wire under it, and then allowing it to hydroplane off onto my hand and move it to a bat and a work surface. That way I can work on it a little bit more while it's still pliable and wet. And so this is what it ends up being. I went in and deformed it in the grip of my hand there, and then made sure that the way that it fell, the rim fell and it deformed inward, was symmetrical, and then formed a little spout on that. And so I'm actually quite happy with the way it turned out. Hope you are too. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.